Hi everybody, welcome to my channel. Today I'm down here at Heritage Park. It's in Colerain Township, close to Cincinnati, Ohio. This is a very historic area. It's not recognized too much, but this was actually the birthplace of most of the settlements around in this area. And it started out, of course, as part of the frontier. Wasn't actually part of the United States for quite a while. So it was contested by the French, the British, and the Americans. But in 1749, a Frenchman named Captain Pierre Joseph Coleraine, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing the poor guy's name, but he led an expedition down this river, down the Great Miami River, which is over to my left. I'll show you more of that in a few minutes. He led an expedition down this river to claim the area in the name of France. They were trying to claim all of the tributaries of the Ohio River because the Ohio River was used as a main highway for early settlement. The natives and the European settlers alike all used the rivers as easy access in and out of areas like this in the frontier. And so they sent this expedition down the river in canoes, and they planted lead plates at the mouth of this river here, the Great Miami, and also the other tributaries. And they planted these lead plates right in the bank of the river. So in 1749, this place was marked claiming this area for France. Now, there were 6 of these lead plates originally. Only one of them still exists. It's in Richmond, Virginia, in the Virginia Historical Society. So they still have one of the original plates. The rest of the plates were dug up and used as bullets or sinkers for fishing, things like that. Being made of lead, of course, they disappeared quickly when people found these things. And later on, this became the Northwest Territory, and more British settlements moved westward. And after the Revolutionary War, more forts were laid out along the banks of the rivers to protect the settlers as they moved into the areas to build their homes and their settlements. Now in 1790, John Dunlap, a surveyor, led 11 families down this Great Miami River, or up the river actually, if you came from Cincinnati. I'm not sure if it came from Cincinnati or if it came from up north, but they came by flatboat. They brought maybe a few cows, some food, some grain, some things to plant, and not a whole lot, a few basic tools. And they landed right here where Heritage Park is right now to set up their homes. At first they didn't set up homes, they set up what was called a station. These stations were small settlements built along the riverbanks, and this area, they were the beginnings of the settlements. They would lay out a station, survey the area, secure the area, and then begin building their homes. But John Dunlap and 11 families settled right here, and built what was called Dunlap Station. They were here for not too long before things started to look a little dicey for them. It was not quite ready for settlement, if you know what I mean. I mean, it was still a dangerous area as far as Indian raids and raids from the British, things like that. Revolutionary War was over, but the area was still contested. So as soon as they built their little Dunlap Station, things began to happen, such as one day a boy was out hunting wild grapes and he disappeared. They found his hat underneath a tree, and that was the last they saw of this boy. He disappeared. And also, I'm sure when they were out on scouting expeditions, they would spy some of these Indian scouts now and then and realize that they were under surveillance and they weren't welcome in the area. A lot of the Miami and Shawnee people, some of the other tribes, used this area as hunting, and they had some temporary villages set up. More of those were upriver or along the banks of the Ohio River, not so much in this general area right here, but they did use the area for hunting and fishing. So after being here a while, they realized that this settlement they made, they built a stockade fence around the settlement of Dunlap Station, and it was not well built. It was not very secure. It wasn't for any protection from Indian raids. It was said that a dog could easily jump over the picket fence to get into the fort, the so-called forts, which is not good. And there were wide spaces between pickets, and it was not much protection from raids. So they sent for help to Fort Washington. Fort Washington was the major fort built near Cincinnati, about 15 miles east of here. So a contingent of troops were sent from Fort Washington to garrison at this Dunlap Station, which they later called Fort Coleraine. It was called Fort Coleraine because John Dunlap's hometown was Coleraine, Ireland. So these troops, there were 12 soldiers altogether, probably not including Jacob Kingsbury. But Jacob Kingsbury, Lieutenant Jacob Kingsbury, was in charge of these troops garrisoned at the fort. And they helped to strengthen the walls and to clear out more trees so that they were not so prone to Indian attack, because there were too many trees that attackers could use for cover. They wanted more wide open area, not only for their crops but for their cattle, but also for security reasons. So if someone was coming to attack them, they could see them coming for a while and have some warning. Well, on January 8th, okay, let me get this straight. A couple of weeks before the fort was attacked, it was eventually attacked, but a couple of weeks before that, there was a surveying party patrolling along the river, probably up this way, a little bit north of here. It was John Wallace, Captain John Sloan, Abner Hunt, and a Mr. Cunningham, who was living at the Dunlap Station. They were surveying along the river here when they were attacked by Indians. Mr. Cunningham was killed and scalped right away. Mr. Sloan was wounded. Captain Sloan was wounded. Abner Hunt was captured, and John Wallace helped Sloan back to the station, helped him get back to the station, and let the people at the station know that there were Indians in the area and there was likely to be an attack pretty soon. So on January 8th, 1791, some women from the fort were outside the fort, out in front of the fort, taking care of the cows when they noticed the Indians were closing in. And they ran to the fort and warned the people that they were about to be attacked. The troops and the settlers were not well armed, they're not well supplied. It was cold winter. Many of the people at the fort were sick, unable to fight, so they didn't have very many people to protect the fort. It was a really dire situation for them to confront this large body of Indians. There's not an exact number, they don't know the exact number, but it was probably 100 more, maybe more, Indians that surrounded this fort. And the fort was built on a sort of a horseshoe shape, jutting out into the river. If you can picture that, it's sort of a horseshoe shape peninsula sticking out into the Miami River here. One of the backs of the back of the fort was facing the river, and the rest of it was sort of facing inland here. The Indians came downriver, along the river, probably parked their canoes a little bit farther up north from here, and got out and advanced towards the fort. Now, supposedly, the Indian raiders were led by the Chief Shawnee, Chief Blue Jacket, and Simon Girty. This is still open to debate as far as I believe. But Simon Girty, if you don't know who he was a white man who was captured in 1755 by the Indians on a raid during the French and Indian War. And he was eventually turned over to the Seneca tribe and lived with them for 5 years. And while he was living with the Indians, he developed a lot of their ways and customs and really became sympathetic to the Indians' cause, in the Indian ways. So he later became what some people called a renegade, some people called a hero, but he was an interpreter for the British and also a scout, and he served mostly with Indian raiders. So on the morning of 1791, January 8th, the Indians moved in on the fort, surrounded it, and began their siege. Now the settlers at Fort Coleraine were able to hold off the attack all through the day and night. It was a difficult situation for so many reasons. As I said, they were understaffed. There were only, if there were 12 soldiers, maybe 10, 15 people from the fort able to fight. There were not many able-bodied people at the fort to defend the fort, and they soon became desperate for ammunition. They ran low on ammunition. The women of the fort began melting down forks and spoons to make bullets, and they were running low on powder. During the night, January 8th, Indians would continuously run up to the fort with torches, trying to set fire to the stacks of firewood or to the fort itself. Now the homes of the fort were sort of a lean-to variety. At first, before the soldiers got there to improve conditions at the fort, the lean-tos were situated so that the roofs slanted downwards towards the outside walls, and that made it too easy for someone just to hop up on the roof and enter the fort. So they later improved the homes so that the walls towards the back of the fort that were actually part of the picket fence were higher, and the roofs would slant downwards into the inside section of the fort, and that made it more secure. But anyway, all during the night, the people stationed at this fort could hear the screams of Abner Hunt, who, as you remember, had been captured. According to stories, the Indians stood Abner Hunt on a tall tree stump for everybody at the fort to see, and they tortured him all night long. And they kept telling the people in the fort, "You just surrender, everything will be okay. Just surrender, and we won't harm you." Apparently, the people in the fort didn't believe that. As they tortured Abner Hunt all night long, allegedly sticking hot sticks into his skin, torturing him in other ways, all night. Now, the river was frozen over at this time, and during the night, one of the men volunteered to take a canoe around the backside of the fort and then cut up, once he got to the bank downriver from the fort, cut up and go east, try to make his way to Cincinnati, to Fort Washington, to tell the people at Fort Washington that the Fort Coleraine was under attack. So there are different accounts of this story. Some accounts say it was one person who went along with this expedition, and some say it was two. But let's say it's two. These two men went downriver and tried to go for help. They got down to, since the river was partially frozen, it was hard to get around, but they got down to where they could cut across without being being found by the attackers, and tried to make their way to Fort Washington for help. Meanwhile, all night long, the settlers were under attack. Sometime during the night, two French hunters were out and heard the firing coming from this area, and they went to Fort Washington to let them know that the fort was under attack. I believe that's how the fort eventually found out. Josiah Harmar was general at Fort Washington at this time, and he gathered together some troops, and I believe some troops were sent from not Grand Bend. Anyway, close by. Some other troops were gathered, and they were sent towards Fort Washington to try to help the settlers. Well, by the time the soldiers got here to rescue the settlers, the fight was over. Probably the Indian attackers, Simon Girty and Blue Jacket, got word that some reinforcements were on the way, and they didn't know how many reinforcements were coming, but I'm sure they didn't want to fight too many people. Fighting the settlers at Fort Coleraine was one thing, but fighting a contingent of troops from Fort Washington was a different story. So they retreated. They retreated during the night, made their way back up north. They broke off into two columns. This is the their way of fighting back in the Indian Wars. They would usually lead these raids in two groups under two leaders. In this case, it was Simon Girty and Blue Jacket, and the raiders broke off into two columns, went back north to wherever they had come from in the first place, and the attack was over. So this little settlement was able to hold off an Indian raid. There were several settlements along this river here, going all the way up towards Hamilton, Ohio. And during this time, it was a wild frontier. It was, if you came out to this area to settle, you were literally taking your life in your hands. There was nothing easy about it. Later on, after the attack, the fort was pretty much abandoned. Most people went back to Cincinnati or over the river into Kentucky, or other places a lot safer. But while I'm here at Heritage Park, I'll show you some of the different areas. You may be able to see over my shoulder here. You see? Over the hill, that hill there is the area that the troops would have had to come over to from Fort Washington, making their way to Fort Coleraine. This is the area they would have come from. The rescue party. The rescue party who came too late. And while I'm here, I'll take a look at the river, show you the river, and some of the other things to see along here. Hope you can hear me. Hope you can understand me. I bit my tongue really bad a couple of days ago, so you may not be able to understand me. I hope you can. And there's quite a breeze blowing, so I don't know if the wind's interfering with the video recording or not. I guess I won't find out till I get home. Also brought my lunch bag. Gonna have some lunch while I'm here. So we'll see how that goes. Here's a marker, the only thing left to commemorate Fort Coleraine and the people who lived and died here. It just says former site of Fort Dunlap, 1790. That's all. That's all's left to tell future humanity about Fort Coleraine.